Okay, hello everyone. This is Any Given Monday, the solo edition. So, thank you for joining me today. I am a little bit more anxious today about presenting because I am talking to you, but I'm talking to myself, and it's a little bit different. So, allow me to reintroduce myself. My name is LJ Finney of N18. We develop leaders on and off the golf course, and our focus is elevating leadership, really looking at how do we build better professionals or stronger teams through soft skills, interpersonal skills, transferable skills, and leveraging tools like golf to help people discover greater insights because sometimes it takes action to change behavior. So I decided that this would be a great time to amplify a conversation around an emerging industry, the climate industry. It itself, we're looking at renewables, we're looking at sustainable energy, we're looking at climate justice, and there are a lot of advocates and individuals in this space that are doing tremendous work and advancing the cause conversation. But what you might notice more often are the ways in which technology is emerging in this space. So, of course, that caught my attention. If you don't know anything about me, I studied computer information systems undergrad and have a bachelor's of science in computer information systems and then a master's of science in computer science from what is now New York University Tandon School of Engineering. And I spent most of my career in technology at a time when people didn't understand why they needed technology. Similar to that are the trends that we're seeing in climate, in and around sustainable energy, meaning you see a lot more of these renewable cars, EV chargers. You're starting to see solar panels. You're seeing more wind farms. You're seeing a lot of different things. And for some that are paying attention, you're also seeing an emergence of a green economy. You'll hear it mentioned in the presidential debates. You'll hear conversations of offshore wind. You'll see different projects emerging in Long Island and throughout New York and coastal regions. But then in addition to that, in areas that have a lot of sun, like Texas and Florida and California, you'll see solar farms. And so what does all of this mean to the average person or the individual? Well, I felt like it was important to do some research and learn and understand what that is, and then share it with you. So I'd first like to acknowledge there's so many people that are in our immediate networks that we're not asking the questions of. And we're not actually participating in some of the events and activities and opportunities to learn more about the industry and understand what is my role. Because the truth about technology and anything is there's always going to be a need for an accountant, for an attorney, for an engineer, for an architect. Do you know the actual domain? Maybe not. There may be a learning curve. But as with science and as with anything, the options are limitless in how you learn. It's being in the space to actually be able to apply it. So same for project management. But the people that can make an immediate transfer into this business are those that understand tax credits, the accountants, those that understand electrical engineering and mechanical engineering, because being able to convert energy, I think when we were growing up, we learned that energy can never be created nor destroyed. And you heard all of these cliches, but the reality is it was very difficult prior years to capture energy and just store it. So that's why we have so many batteries. But anyway, the whole point of this Any Given Monday, and I will be talking for the next 30 minutes. So hopefully you are going to make some comments if you're listening, because that I can read and I can moderate. So if you have questions and comments, please share them and I will read them. So first things first, what is Climate Week? Well, Climate Week starts actually next week, which is why I thought it was important to have this conversation because there's still time for you to sign up for many of the events that are actually occurring. And the purpose of Climate Week is really to raise awareness, foster collaboration, and drive action on climate change. It took me down a rabbit hole. I'd like to thank Alex Muir, he's in sales strategy over at FI Group, for helping me better understand different ways to research topics. Like from an academic perspective, we all learned how to study for tests in school. And as an entrepreneur and a business owner, I've learned how to research topics of interest. But the art of doing a deep dive on a topic or a subject with the interest or the effort of trying to understand what your role can be in that market and how you can really make an impact or solve a pain point or problem, that's a different exercise. So I say this because it allowed me to go on a search, a rabbit, like more down a rabbit hole, if you would say that, to better understand why are there so many more conversations in the presidential debates? Why do we see so many conversations around green jobs? And for those that are not paying attention because you're really focused on doing what you're doing, and that's fine, but the world is still happening around you, it's important to pay attention to why these things are occurring. So on my research, one of the things I came across was the UN Climate Change Conference, COP15 in Copenhagen, was an international meeting held in December 2009. So the real conversation around this may have started in an official manner internationally in 2009. And the goal was to replace the Kyoto Protocol, which was due to expire in 2012, which means that it went back even further. But COP15 didn't achieve a legally binding agreement, but it resulted in the Copenhagen Accord. Now, the reality is we've heard these things, we don't quite know. Maybe it doesn't matter for you in your day to day. You get on the train, you go to work, you do what you need to do. Or maybe you're trading futures, or you're in operations, calculating things and reconciling books and records and balancing someone's chart of accounts. Who knows what you're doing? But in this case, it's important to kind of hear the other side of the conversation. Anyhow, the non-binding agreement for the Copenhagen Accord was established of limiting global warming to 2 degrees Celsius and encourage developed countries to provide financial assistance to developing countries to help them adapt to climate change. Now, this is maybe the inception point or the origin, but then you move into the Paris Agreement, which is a legally binding international treaty on climate change adopted by the nations of the world in 2015. And its aim was to keep global warming well below 2 degrees Celsius. And at a macro level, that makes sense. But at a micro, what are we doing on a day-to-day basis? It makes it a little bit harder to understand. So keeping it below 2 degrees Celsius, which is above pre-industrial levels, and to pursue efforts to limit to 1.5 degrees Celsius. And when you think about the Paris Agreement, there were some key points that were rather important at that time in 2015. I think that was like eons ago, almost 10 years ago. Nationally determined contributions. Each country was required to submit its own NDCs, nationally determined contributions, outlining its planned contributions to reducing greenhouse gas. Okay, global stock take. Every 5 years, countries will review their collective progress towards achieving the goals of the agreement. And of course, my favorite, climate finance. Developed countries are encouraged to provide financial assistance to developing countries to help them mitigate and adapt climate change. Now, that was the Paris Agreement, and it was a significant milestone in international climate cooperation, meaning all of our nations work together, kind of like NATO. And it was the first global agreement that actually commits to virtually all countries taking action in climate change. However, that agreement was only as strong as its implementation, and it required continued effort and participations. So when we think about going back, you may ask, well, how has the US participated? Because that's rather important as a global nation and a leader in industry. Most companies that are headquartered here are thinking, how do I participate? Or you hope that they are thinking about how do they reduce their global carbon emissions footprint, and how do they impact society as a whole, we hope. But the key aspects of U.S. participation started with the Kyoto Protocol, and we being U.S. was a signatory. Then the Obama administration took a more active approach to climate change, implementing policies such as the Clean Power Plan and rejoining the Paris Agreement. Then the Trump administration withdrew the U.S. from the Paris Agreement, and then rolled back many of the climate policies implemented by the previous communication administration. And so when we think about that, you're like, okay, now what? Well, then you have the Biden administration, and they rejoined the Paris Agreement. I mean, politics in itself is complicated, but they rejoined the Paris Agreement and then took steps to strengthen U.S. climate policies. And that included setting ambitious emissions reduction targets and investing in clean energy technologies, which is what I'm excited about and what we're here to also talk about. These key actions, you think about it, were the emissions reduction. So if you think you're riding in a Tesla, or you're riding in one of these newer cars that are reducing the global emissions, that's an investment. And if you got a rebate on that, there was a reason for that. It came from the government. And when you think about the shifts in energy sources and the increased efficient energy, you're thinking about how do we start to reduce the overall impact of what we're doing. Now, there's another side of that we'll talk about in a moment, climate finance. We've provided financial assistance and international leadership. We've been a leader in negotiations as a country, as a signatory and other climate-related initiatives. But overall, we have a mixed record on climate change generally. And it's made progress, but it's still very ambitious to try to see, like, how does this get implemented? So another question that I asked, because I was really curious, like, what does this mean for the average person? Again, like, it's a lovely history lesson. How does that impact whether or not milk and butter are more expensive today versus yesterday, or what is happening with gas prices? I will say in New Jersey, gas was $2.97 for regular, and that was remarkable. I was quite excited to see that. Of course, my tank was already full at that time, and while I was on my way to a golf course with a nail in my tire, unrelated, I recognized that I'm doing not enough to reduce the overall carbon footprint with my travels to play golf. So anyway, going back to the ambitious emissions reduction, the target was 50 to 52% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. So now look, it's 2024. How will we measure that as a country? Greenhouse gas inventory. So the EPA, which is Environmental Protection Agency, they compile a comprehensive list of greenhouse gas emissions. So these are the things that like the average person doesn't care about unless this is your industry. And so obviously I have notes because I can't remember all of this from the top of my head, but research, I've organized my notes in a way to help you understand what's happening. But when you look at what they've organized or what they're managing, it's data from energy, industry, transportation, agriculture, and overall land usage. So you think about the solar farms and how they're starting to pop up, or the way that water and wind farms are starting to emerge on the offshore areas, or even in just these areas that are normally prone to tornadoes and storms. There's a reason for that. You're able to generate energy. If you're able to generate energy, the benefit is that it should reduce the cost of energy. Has anyone tried to cool a house and check their bill? Right. Sometimes we're sitting in the heat like, do I really want to do that? If that's you, then you want to understand how will wind and solar energy help reduce your overall bill, because in the end, we are paying a lot of bills, and the goal is to how do we ensure quality of life, but then also reduce the overall footprint so that the world doesn't come to end for the future generations, if you actually care about those things. If anyone is old enough to remember, there was this conversation around aerosol cans. Does anyone remember the campaign to get rid and ban aerosol cans because of what they were doing to the ozone? Similar conversation. All right, I digress. So the EPA, what are they collecting? They're collecting data from various sources, federal and state agencies, industry reports, and scientific studies. Shout out to Dr. Sheila Foster at the Columbia Climate, the Institute at Columbia, because she's written a number of think pieces, and I'll put her link in the bio as well, and just very informative, educational pieces around climate and environmental justice. We didn't get to that yet because all of this is a big, big picture. And there's just so much data to look at and so many different pieces of the history that bring us to this point. But I thought it was rather important to share at least this part so that you know why you're going to sign up for some of the Climate Week events. And many of them are very interesting, educational, informative, but it's important to know like what your role is in this world and the things that are happening around us. So anyway, the challenges and opportunities were this 2030 target. It's hard. Like we really need to look as a country around what are the clean energy sources? Are there enough? It's like thinking about the first cell phone. Do you remember like the really big cell phone? For those that can remember, for those that saw it on television, same difference. The phone was very inefficient, but you know, everything improves exponentially. Its technology increases it, as it used to be called Moore's law, but it's no longer Moore's law because it's like exponential change. We're talking about the ability to constantly innovate and to improve. And with every advance, you just need more, and we need more power, you need more information, but we also get more efficient and we get better. So the transition to clean energy sources, the renewable energy, nuclear power, then there's the policy that is being implemented, regulations. Like, for example, New York City has set a target as well. If you look at the buildings, we are a city where the lights are on all the time. How much does that cost? Did you ever look at an office building and how the lights stay on all day? What does that do to the environment? These are the questions that are being asked. And is it necessary to have a city full of empty or vacant office buildings that are fully lit? In some cases, the lights will now go off on certain floors when it's not being used. But when you think about it overall, holistically, we've not solved this problem as a nation, as an industrialized nation. So what are the policies that can help enforce companies to really think about how this is working? Obviously not impacting their revenue. And what is the return on investment? Many will ask. You know, you can't introduce these things and cause an expense without understanding how can you generate revenue and help these businesses thrive. So technology is the next side of this. How do we invest in the technologies that will allow for us to do these things more efficiently, that will not negatively impact the business's bottom line? Because if I'm a company that has an office building with headquarters in New York City, maybe the zip code is 10019, that Midtown Manhattan area, I don't want to think about how I'm going to make another investment in reducing my the light bill when I'm really just trying to figure out how to trade stock portfolios. But the reality is we all have to participate. And so this is where the conversation becomes more collaborative. How do you partner with the companies that are leading the edge in solar energy, like a Block Power? Shout out to Keith for also introducing me to a number of informative things, because this network is about sharing information as well. So to keep us on track, we have solar, wind, and energy storage. There are electric vehicles. That's another component of this market. So when you think about the investments, there have been incentives for people and individuals and buildings, tax credits the government's provided to encourage the adoption of solar energy. So if you are considering solar energy, then you should be talking to an accountant that specializes in understanding tax credits. If you are a building owner or you own multiple buildings across the United States, maybe you own corporate buildings or you own apartment buildings, whatever you own, tax credits exist right now. And so you should take advantage of them under the current presidential regime. Now, obviously, things may change after the election, but the reality is it takes a long time to roll back some of these incentives. So take advantage of them if you are a building owner. When it comes to the large scale projects, we have some traditional energy sources that are being converted to solar, and then residential solar, like that's solar panels that you see on home. The challenge with those are, how sustainable are they themselves, right? The cost to produce these solar panels, to maintain them, to allow them to grow, like how long do they last? And this is research that you need to do, no different than researching buying your next car or your next generator, or whatever it is. When I used to live in New Jersey, I coincidentally lived on a grid. They said we lived on a grid where there was always going to be backup power. So when everyone else's power went out, we should still have power. And that was because we were on the same line as a hospital. The irony of it at that time is I didn't appreciate it, but I became a safe haven for all of my friends to stay at my home because I was the only person that still had power. And when you think about what is it that you can do in these extreme storms to prepare or prevent outages, these are the type of investments that you can research that are related but unrelated to the growth of this industry. Separate and apart, wind energy. Why is this relevant? You have onshore and offshore wind, and they have experienced rapid growth. The wind turbine technology, if you're interested in the technology, that's a great place to start researching. There's an industry and a market around making that more efficient and helping to understand the general adoption of being able to transform this energy. What you didn't know is that there's also wind futures being traded. So there's a market for this on being able to capture this energy and being able to actually monetize it, because everything is about reducing the cost and making the energy and the usage and the sharing of it more competitive as a market. No different than oil and gas being traded in different commodities, but it's worth researching. And separate from that, or actually in addition to that, going to be energy storage. So for all of the energy that's created, we need a way to store it that's efficient. If you think about your batteries, well, how many times do we have to charge a phone battery? How inefficient is that? And think about, how do we start to make this technology better, but then also sustainable? So we have battery technology, and then there's grid scale storage, because in the event that there is an outage, how do you maintain energy or be able to provide energy to the nation, to certain regions? If New York is going to consume energy, if all of the power grids went out in New York, which they did in that outage, we always are looking at, how do you make sure that hospitals and the emergency providers have access to technology, because life still happens. And then electric vehicles, my favorite, because the federal government offered many tax credits and other incentives for people to purchase electric vehicles. And from an infrastructure perspective, how do you support those actual electric vehicles? I recently went to an event, and a woman had, and I forget the name, but I'll put it in the notes. She created a technology that would draw power off of buildings, and Con Ed was piloting her program. I think it was, I forget, I'm sorry. But the key here is you shouldn't have to recharge your vehicle in the parking lot of like Wegmans, you should be able to do it anywhere that you park your car. So imagine being able to draw power off of buildings and charge your electric vehicle. So Con Ed is piloting that right now. I'll put that in the notes. She was it's remarkable. It's based on a need and a problem. No one wants to sit there, but if you're going to park your car overnight in front of your home and you're not the owner of a estate in Scarsdale, then maybe you need a charger elsewhere outside of the parking lot. And so that's an example. So I have been talking for 20 minutes about the technology and the industry. But before I pivot to actual Climate Week and which events you should go to, or which ones I'm going to, so that maybe I'll see you there, I do want to talk about the thing that caught my attention the most, which was wind futures. And wind futures are financial contracts that represent the future price of wind energy. And they're a type of derivative that's similar to stock futures or commodity futures. And as a person that spent most of my career in finance on Wall Street, but behind the scenes doing technology, project management, and more of an operational role, I did get to spend a lot of time with prime brokerage and stock loan. That was an amazing team, full of amazing people. Probably the best working situation I had in my professional career, because I'd say that everyone was so remarkable in their way of doing business, but their way of managing the client and also managing the information that we were capturing. So if you think about prime brokerage, short and long positions, managing these portfolios for these trading companies, but then also the stock loan, putting things out. I feel like the market has changed a lot since that time. But when I then moved into equity derivatives, it was a very unique market. And so it made me wonder, what is the market for energy generally? And that's where wind future and energy futures kind of came to be. And while I may be speaking of it generally, the underlying asset for everyone that's interested or curious, because I suggest you do your own research, but also dig a little bit deeper and ask the questions, is the price of wind energy. And it can be measured by the average price in a region, by wind energy index. They have specific terms, conditions, it's the same as any commodity: delivery date, amount of wind energy to be delivered, and the price which it will be delivered. And it's traded on an organized exchange. But what I thought was interesting was that it's no different. The weather conditions, speculation, there's hedging. It has all of the pieces of any traded entity. And I think that it's worth researching for anyone that is paying attention to climate change or paying attention to markets. If you want to go deeper, it's on the ICE, which is the Intercontinental Exchange. You can do CME, Chicago Mercantile Exchange, or the European Energy Exchange, which is EEX. And the tickers that you'll look for is ICE Wind, CME Wind, or EEX Wind. And I think you should check it out. But that leads us to the climate change. Same is true for solar energy. Traded on the same markets, no different than a commodity. For those that, well, I won't go into that, but for those that are paying attention, the events that you'll notice, storms, you should ask the questions of, like, how does that impact the market? What is that doing for the market? How can I participate in this market? That's where you go to, maybe you have a financial advisor, ask them the questions like, are these things in my portfolio? They are highly volatile. They are not standard investments that you'll see, but I do not give financial advice. I'm just saying, check it out. Ask the questions that you should ask. What does this have to do with golf? Absolutely nothing. What does this have to do with leadership development? A little, because all of this means that somebody needs to do the work to actually implement and build the things that you're asking about or that you're seeing. And so in that, we see the emergence of a green economy. We see a conversation around environmental justice. The environmental justice is that you'll see that many of the plants, factories were often placed in communities of color. And in that, there's an opportunity to do right by people. But then there's also an opportunity to build and give jobs to individuals that might have been displaced from other industries, but that there's a need there to have skills that will be relevant for the future. And these skills are, how do we build these things that are needed to allow us to reduce our carbon footprint? How are we building these solar and wind and water, all of the technologies, these turbines? Like, it's technology, and it actually has almost like a factory appeal. But the reality is it's more than that. It's also understanding the science behind what's happening. So for all of my STEM majors, it's worth investigating and becoming more curious about. But then it's also more important to teach the next generation, how do you start to participate in this market? So getting back on track, the reason that green jobs are emerging, the money was invested by the government to actually build out these markets to create jobs and to invest in the overall, you say, middle class, or um, to reduce and eliminate poverty, to create jobs, literally create jobs. When you think about the investment in the infrastructure, the Reinvestment Act, and all of the things that have been put in place, the conversation is around how do we build our nation, and how do you build out the nation so that we can start to take control of our energy and not be so reliant on gas and oil. So there's controversy in all of that, right? You're looking at different ways that markets work. But in the end, the conversation is around green jobs. And so with that being said, the question that you may ask me is, how do we participate in Climate Week? Well, it starts next week. I have signed up for an event at the Nest, which is being hosted by the Nest, which is going to be at Jacob Javits. I will put it in the comments. My favorite aspect of that event, I will put the link in the comments, but there are a number of panels being hosted in and around just general climate change events and activities. There's also a lot of dialogue around, and I'm pulling it up now, advancing climate solutions. That starts on the 24th to the 26th. And to get involved, all you have to do is sign up. They have a few complimentary passes, which is always fun. Love anything that is educational, informative, and free. You can watch some of the sessions on demand if you're not able to attend. And then there are a series of like networking and party events, which I wouldn't say you necessarily need to go to learn more about this industry. But on this climate campus, I will say I am most looking forward to two different events. It's this, and then also what's being hosted at Columbia University. So they have a few co-hosted meetings on the 24th and the 25th. I suggest that you find the thing that lights you up and gives you the most excitement. So that's one. So I'll put that in the link. Two, Columbia University has a climate campus. If you don't know, there are many students studying the impact of climate, but also the relevance in our New York City market and just urban landscapes. And Dr. Sheila Foster is one of the people that is at the Columbia University climate campus. But on their campus, they're actually hosting a number of educational sessions. I recommend attending those as well. I will be at a few of those. Separate, you also have like the UN coming into town. So I think you can be aware of what's happening there. But overall, the two that I'm working between are going to be the Javits Center and Columbia University. There's also an event at the Penn Club that I may attend, but the reality is it's between those two real global leaders. Follow Women in Energy. So shout out to Women in Energy, and a young lady that I met named Emily Porro. She has an amazing newsletter, very informative, and it provides a lot of information about different topics in energy and this market generally. I'd say consume as much information as possible. Those are three of my favorite resources right now. One of the other things that I noticed that you may not pay attention to, or me, if you're investing your money, this is the future. If you're investing your time, this is the future as well. No different than AI. Every single industry is based off a need. And the more that we introduce technology, introduce AI, it's consuming tremendous amounts of energy. And for as much as we consume, we need to produce it. So what are other ways to produce it? Because there's not going to be more oil. There's not going to be more gas. So we need different and more creative ways to solve that challenge and that problem. And so here we are. And when you think about who we're training in the industry, that's where people like me come in, because transferable skills are critical in stepping into new markets and new spaces. And when you think about the green economy and you think about training individuals to participate in the workforce, everyone needs soft skill training. Everyone needs to understand what life is as a project manager. Even if you're not formally titled as a project manager, it's a mindset. Everyone needs communication skills to be able to think critically and to be able to think strategically and be able to work as part of a team. Like these are all skills that anyone needs no matter what. And if you're not learning them throughout your professional career, or maybe you haven't participated in a professional career, these are skills that will benefit you as you thrive and grow in this community, especially networking skills. To be able to talk to individuals about a topic and learn more about it, these are transferable skills and they're relevant for anything you do. My favorite way to develop them are on the golf course, but there are many other ways. And with that being said, I will put the links to the 2 events that I'll be at for Climate Week. It starts next week, starting unofficially maybe the 23rd, definitely the 24th, 25th, and 26th. And there's just so much to learn. Find the thing that you're most passionate about, you're most curious about, whether it's sustainable fashion, whether it's energy storage, whether it's electric vehicles, whether it's urban landscapes, whether it's environmental justice or climate justice. There's just so much in this market, and it would behoove you to understand and participate, because why not? Anyway, my name is LJ Finney. Thank you for joining me on this solo conversation. On our next episode, we'll have some guests talking about climate, energy, and change. And that's it for today. Thank you for joining us on Any Given Monday.